Welcome to the Straight Talk on Fleet podcast with Erin Gilchrist. Each week, Erin will be breaking down fleet management, trying to cut through the noise and get down to the real issues safety and operations leaders are struggling with every day. The goal will be to get to the bottom of how leaders can break down these silos of information, accelerate change management, how to use real-time, accurate data to drive massive efficiencies across fleet-focused business processes, and to elevate people's careers with emerging best practices. Now it's time for the Straight Talk on Fleet.
Okay, hello again, Fleet community. We're back for the 34th episode of the Straight Talk on Fleet. I'm Erin, your host of the Straight Talk, and on my podcast, I just really try to be an objective and reliable source of information for our fleet ecosystem based on my experience as an enterprise fleet manager for many, many years. But today, I'm super honored and excited to invite Steve Kiefer to our podcast. Steve is the founder and chairman of the Kiefer Foundation, whose mission and pillars we're going to talk about today as we get through the podcast. What's great is Steve understands our industry. He's been in automotive his whole career and left General Motors about a year and a half ago to lead the foundation full time. So Steve, you'll do a better job introducing yourself than I can. So take a minute to, introduce yourself, share your personal story with our listeners today.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to your listeners today. I have a chance to talk about this topic, which is very near and dear to me. This topic that's really an epidemic around the country and around the world, which is distracted driving. And I normally introduce myself as my name is Steve, and I'm a recovering distracted driver. A little play on sort of the AA introduction. But what I mean by that is, if you would have seen me just 7 years ago, you might have seen me on the streets of Detroit, Michigan, in a brand new Chevrolet Corvette convertible. I was, in a fairly significant leadership position at General Motors. You'd find me driving on the roads, often driving with my knee, drinking a coffee in one hand and holding my cell phone up in the other hand as I quickly looked through emails and texts. And, I was an automotive guy, as you mentioned, for 40 years. I was 40 years in the industry. So I knew the dangers of distracted driving as a car guy, but I always considered myself a really good distracted driver. And what I mean by that is, we know the stats. It takes about 5 seconds to read a text when you're driving. So I would actually hold my phone up on the dash and glance at it quickly to try to be able to read texts and emails in maybe 2 or 3 seconds and be a bit safer. And I thought that was sort of a good distracted driver. So I can admit that I was really bad on this topic, as most people are, and I try to be a bit vulnerable and say it's okay because until something bad happens to you, maybe you'll never change behavior. And that's really why I speak about this, because of course something really bad did happen to me and my family. So it was nearly 7 years ago on September 19th that my son Mitchel was driving up to Michigan State University. It was his first month as a new Spartan. He had just finished a great career at Detroit Catholic Central and was a member of the state championship hockey team, where he was a goalie on that team. And he was starting his career at Michigan State University. It was a beautiful Monday morning on September 19th. He had been home for the weekend to go see a Lions game, and he was driving up at about 7:50 in the morning. Traffic slowed down on I-96 while he was driving to school. He slowed down, and unfortunately the young lady behind him did not. So she was on her phone, and she rear-ended Mitchel and drove him across a very narrow strip of grass on I-96 in Ingham County, just outside of East Lansing. Hit him and drove him across this narrow median into oncoming traffic, where he was hit by a truck and a trailer and killed instantly. And well, it's amazing how often I've had to tell that story, and sometimes even unemotionally, but the pain never goes away. And every time I tell it, it's kind of like reliving it, because it's just the most horrific thing that any family can go through. And as we tried to deal with the aftermath and the grief of losing my number two child, I started looking at the stats, and the stats were just horrendous. I mean, the official stats in this country say that, first of all, there's 40 to 43,000 people each year that are killed on the highways of the United States. We think, the stats say about 10%, so about 10 people per day are killed by distracted drivers. But as you look into the data, you find out that it's way underreported. As a matter of fact, Mitchel's crash was not reported as a distracted driving event. So we really think the number is more like 50 or 50% even. So, if you can imagine 50 people being killed each day by this just senseless, selfish act of distracted driving, it's just horrific. And that's why we decided immediately, really, in the month after we lost Mitchel, to start the Kiefer Foundation in his honor and really make it our mission to bring an end to distracted driving and all associated crashes and deaths.
Wow. First off, incredibly sorry for your loss. And, you mentioned telling this story and emotionally, I think, just your selfless act of saying, inside of our grief and our own pain, we're going to do something. And you've done way more than something. You've done something really big, but to help raise awareness and so that another family doesn't have to go through what you've gone through. And you mentioned that the statistics, and I look at these, and I think this idea of distracted driving being underreported, I mean, dramatically, right? Dramatically. And I'm hoping that when we talk today about legislation a little bit, that you can share some knowledge and insights around how we're capturing these events a little bit better today, because data, is a motivator. And it might not be a motivator for, this teenager out on the road right now as we sit here texting and driving, but definitely for organizations to think about what they're doing with their drivers. And so in the fleet industry, we're managing hundreds of thousands of vehicles and more drivers. And I think there's a duty and obligation for organizations to take a look at what's happening and make drastic and immediate moves to ensure that they keep their drivers safe, and then everyone else that's out on the road driving alongside their drivers. So I'm excited to dig in, and thanks again for sharing your story. Before we talk about the foundation, talk a little bit about the Just Drive campaign. I know on my podcast, on several safety and podcast episodes, I've said, I've challenged organizations and fleet managers to say, how do we make the cab a just drive zone? But let's talk about this campaign. Maybe we can help push the envelope on this a little bit.
That would be great. Well, it really is one of our three pillars, because we'll talk more about the three pillars of the Kiefer Foundation, which are awareness, technology, and legislation. And under the awareness pillar, that was really where we started, because as I said in the statistics, I mean, I think a lot of people just don't realize how huge this problem is, how many people are impacted. And, I often talk about the fatalities, but you can go, multiples of that when you start to talk about injuries and crashes and the cost of crashes and so on. So it's such a huge, huge problem. So trying to get the word out on making everyone aware just how dangerous this was one of the real first activities. And again, we tell the story, and so many other victims' families join us at these conferences and various events to tell the story. And really, our point there is it hurts and it's painful to tell the story, but we want to try to find a way to have people change their behavior before it happens to your family. So that's usually what I tell people is, why are you going to wait until your child is killed to join the cause and try to help this? I mean, you need to learn from my pain and all the other victims' families. So that's kind of the background on awareness. And as we look at awareness, the message is getting out there. As a matter of fact, there's a stat out there that I often cite that says over 90% of the people, when you poll them, they know that driving distracted is dangerous, yet 80 some percent will always admit that they do it occasionally. So it's awareness alone isn't enough. So as we looked at awareness, we started looking, across the country and across the world. And it's interesting because there's dozens of, taglines out there that talk about, eyes up, phones down, things, that are similar or analogous to like click it or ticket with the seatbelt laws. And what we started, we worked with a branding outfit, named Peter Arnell out in New York to try to come up with a very simple message. Wanted it to be sort of the, if some of your listeners remember, at least when I was growing up, we had Nancy Reagan teaching us to just say no. And it, kind of always stuck with us. We knew what, just say no meant for drugs. So we came up with this very simple phrase, and others have used it in the past, but we're trying to rally around this phrase in this campaign called Just Drive. So our message is really simple. It's when you're behind the wheel of an automobile, put your phones down and just drive. And of course, we use this as the logo. It's branded, and we've actually spread this around the country. I'm kind of showing it as a hand fan here, which will keep you cool. But also, people often use it in their car to sort of spread the message when they see somebody doing something inappropriate in another car. It's kind of a subtle way to remind them that that's bad behavior. So we came up with that and thought this was just the most simple way to send the message that you've got one task to do when you're behind the wheel, and stay off the phone, stop eating, stop putting makeup on, stop reading the paper, some of the crazy things people do, and just drive. So we think that's a really good, easy message to understand. As I mentioned, we've spread this now to the Middle East and to Korea and to South America. So it translates very well. It's really quite simple. And to help us launch the campaign, we can talk a little bit about it, but I was pleased to have the support of a friend, Tom Brady, who everyone knows from the NFL. We got Tom Brady involved 2 years ago for 4th of July weekend, and I was introduced through a mutual friend. We told him what we were trying to do, and he's got young children. He's a great guy, and he said, "Hey, if my sending the message can help create awareness, I'm all in." So we have a great video where we kicked this off for 4th of July weekend 2 years ago. And it went viral, of course, as everything does that Tom Brady talks about. And really, we've gone from there to have, and you'll see the video with Tom Brady wearing that exact logo on the shirt. So it's kind of become the Tom Brady shirt. And I can't tell you how many people followed that by saying, "Well, hey, I'd be glad to make a video for you as well." So if you go to our website at mkiefer.org, you can see a number of videos, including one of the best ones is from my previous boss, Mary Barra from General Motors. She saw the Tom Brady video and she said, "Steve, if I can help by making a video, give me a shirt and I'll do it." So she was the first one to make the video after Tom Brady, and hers is outstanding because at the end of it, she challenges everyone to do the same. And I just can't tell you how many automotive suppliers and dealers and customers got on board with Mary's help, and now we kind of let it spread throughout the country and really around the world. So it's hopefully a really good message that makes everyone understand that's the most important thing to do when you're behind the wheel. Just drive.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I think what a great way to raise awareness, and good for Mary. She's an awesome lady,
She is.
and it does not surprise me that she jumped right in and did that. So for our listeners, we'll certainly share those videos out when we post this recorded version of the podcast, and ask people to spread the word. That's what awareness is about, and this idea of just drive. It's so difficult. I think in organizations, we use devices of all kinds, to record hours of service or drive time or do inspections and things that are really important for safety, of our drivers and for our vehicles to be in a fit condition for use every day. And so as fleet leaders, we equip our drivers with handheld devices for all kinds of things, maybe work orders that they have to do, delivery stops, directions. We also, ask them to look at scorecards, driver scorecards. Like, how are you doing? What is your score for aggression? What is your score for inattention? So we give them these and then we say, but don't use them while you drive. So it's just, I think it's this fine line between giving them the tools they need to do their vocational work, but then having the number one focus in all organizations be safety from the office to the cab of the vehicles and beyond. And I think what I've seen in my experience is when drivers start to change their habits at work, they bring that home. And so I know that that's true for me and for my family, to bring those home and to be able to share statistics and information with our families to make our families safer drivers. So, we know that there's a need for technology. And that's a great sort of segue into your second pillar. We know that technology is great, and we know it helps us be safe and efficient. But it's how we use it and how we interact with it when we're behind the wheel that can, end up in a situation that you and your family found yourself in with a fatality. So talk about the technology sort of pillar of your foundation and, what that's meant, what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and even before I mention some of the specific technologies, one thing I would add to your comment is much like the technology that you're providing for, the drivers, for the fleet operators. The car is full of technology, right? I mean, we often talk about the technology associated with the infotainment system, the screens, and sometimes that's quite complex and quite distracting as well. So there are a number of things in the automobile that can take your attention away from that primary task of driving. And I think one of the most powerful things, that's why I'm so pleased to be talking to to fleet owners and people involved in fleet activity, is there's one big difference here, because as we're trying to change behavior, it's one thing to talk about technology and legislation and trying to convince people to change their behavior. Quite often, we'll talk about it when we get to legislation. You'll hear people push back about civil liberties. You can't tell me what I can do in my car. That's a really interesting, different discussion. But what I think is really powerful is when you own a fleet and you're paying someone to drive these cars, you can tell them what to do in the car, and you can tell them that their behavior, their employment is dependent on driving safe, which I think is great, because I think there's such a large percentage of the vehicles that are on the road at any time are people that are driving cars as part of their employment, and their employers can change their behavior just as a requirement for their employment. So I think this is a great topic and a great audience and a great group of people to talk to that are probably making the single most significant difference in road safety. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Maybe as I talk about technology, though, because it again related, we normally again say, first of all, it's really about personal accountability. It's the person behind the wheel that really has to make the decision to be safe. And the good news is if we prefer that you just focus on the road and do nothing else. But if you must stay connected, and we know people, who for various reasons must stay connected, there are a number of ways to be safely connected. So we often talk about, first and foremost, the easiest thing for your users that have iPhones. I mean, turn on the do not disturb mode, or what's now called the focus mode, so that when texts and phone calls come in, there's an automated message that's sent back that says that you're driving and you're not able to take the call. That's something that can be turned on. It's easy. It's instantaneous. It's on everyone's iPhones. That personal decision and personal accountability will already improve safety. Second, we often talk about, most newer vehicles have great connectivity tools like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So if you're driving a newer vehicle, being able to plug your phone in and put it away, or connect it by Bluetooth and put it away in the console, and have basically the ability to stay connected, maybe hear the text. You can and respond to them verbally instead of with text. That's another way that is really easy to stay connected and keep your eyes on the road. And then some of the safety features that we have in vehicles, like lane keep and emergency braking. These technologies are if we can get them to have larger penetration in vehicles, and then of course have people use them, because for all the technologies that I just mentioned, how many times do you see brand new vehicles that have great Bluetooth and connectivity, yet the person's sitting with the phone up to their ear? I mean, so we got to get people to understand they have the technology and then use the technology. And then, as I go a little deeper into some of the technologies, there's some companies that I've been working with. One in particular is Cambridge Mobile Telematics, and they provide the safe driving apps. Now, all of your listeners will have heard and seen the TV commercials and advertisements for insurance companies that talk about safe driving apps. And if you really listen to what they're saying is, they've got these apps that will monitor how you're driving. It monitors 5 key characteristics of speeding, acceleration, cornering, braking, and most importantly, if you're touching the phone or not. And through those characteristics, you can identify a score for a safe driver. Most insurance companies now will offer somewhere between 10 and maybe up to 30% insurance cost reduction if you're willing to download that app and drive safely. So what I normally tell people is, if you're not aware of that, talk to your insurance agent about it. And if your insurance agent doesn't offer it, go find one that does. Because if you're willing to be a safe driver, and I think most people hopefully are, it is easy to get 20 to 30% reduction in a very expensive part of your life, which is automotive insurance, just by downloading these apps and using them. And it's not just about saving money. These apps are almost as addictive or addicting as the phone itself. Many of them have a social aspect to it, so you can have all your friends and family doing it, seeing how you're driving, having a bit of a competition. And what I find myself doing is, I'm looking every time after my drive, see what my score is, and I'm really trying hard to make sure I'm always above 90 points on this score. So those are technologies that are just absolutely readily available that people can use today. They can make them much safer, make their families much safer, and in many cases actually save them some money. There's probably 3 or 4 other technologies we could talk about, but I'll stop at that for now and just say that again, for your listeners, the fleet, the drivers and the fleet operators are probably very much aware of it, but I think the single biggest thing they can do is turn all those tools on and make sure all their family and loved ones are using the same.
Yeah, I love this conversation. Let's start with the vehicle. I think I know in my vehicle, and I have a vehicle that has all the bells and whistles, and I can turn that off just with it. It's right there with the touch of a button. I can say, I don't need to use this. I wouldn't, but it's there. And our drivers and the fleet industry can do the same thing. And I think that we've said, okay, the vehicle can offer so much, and it's really about safety culture and policy. And you mentioned, organizations can tell their drivers what to do in the vehicle that they give them. So this privacy thing, I've always been a firm believer, and well before we had or we knew that distracted driving was such a horrible problem. I mean, I started running a fleet almost 20 years ago, and in 2013 implemented telematics across the entire fleet. And there was a lot of pushback. But now, after all of these years, I've seen there's so many ways that we can overcome the big brother aspect or the privacy aspect. One is we're issuing you a tool to use. And I mean, frankly, it's the most dangerous tool that any organization will ever issue to anyone is a vehicle, right? So it's our job and in our organizations to talk about how dangerous that tool is and to focus on how that tool is to be used first and foremost. Before we talk about how they get to the job or spray the lawn or change the windshield or do the air conditioning and all of the mobile fleets that are out there on our roadways driving hundreds of millions of miles every year, is focus on the tool itself. So I think for organizations that are listening, it's first about when you issue a tool, you would never give your child a knife and not teach them how to use it, right? You wouldn't give someone a gun without a gun safety course. So why on earth wouldn't we first and foremost say this vehicle is a tool and here's how you must use it, and implement policies and accountability measures. And I think that the other thing you said was we can say, hey, these are terms of your employment. We can do that. Right. And so I don't know why employers are afraid to do that. I know there's a lot of talk about how do I keep my drivers. It is a myth. It is a complete myth that your drivers will leave if you implement safety technology in your vehicles. I know firsthand, and the fleet industry knows firsthand, that many fleets have done this and gone 100% with cameras and telematics and not experienced turnover. So I think, the vehicle can go so far, but I definitely think that inward facing cameras that can alert drivers to, hey, you're falling asleep, or waking up a driver when, they see a head nod, or when they look away, say, pay attention to the road. So, at IntelliShift, that's what we do. So of course I'm passionate about it, but more so coming from the heart of a fleet leader, I'm passionate about getting every single person home in better shape than we sent them out in. So, and as a cyclist, I was just out on my bike the other day. I was so shaken up. I'm driving down a 25-mile-an-hour road, and I am following all the rules, and I use my signals. I'm a very loud, I know that's shocking probably to my audience. I'm a loud cyclist. I let people know that I'm there, and I follow the rules and use my signals. And a woman, I felt her car like on my skin. That's how close she was to my body. And her vehicle was new. I know it had all the technology.
Yeah.
So to your point, it's about using it, And then the last thing that I jotted down from your comments on this technology piece is insurance companies. So I was interviewing one of our customers from Fox Electric, and Tommy shared that, they reduced their premium for their fleet insurance, their premium significantly by implementing cameras in their fleet. And not only did he share that they saved money, they had an almost 85% reduction in accidents in the first 6 months. So, it can be done. And they did not lose drivers. They did not have people quit, right? So those are just some, comments I would add for the fleet industry, that we need to take charge of the problem and take ownership and accountability in our fleets, and know that we have the right to do that. And our drivers are not going to leave because we're trying to keep them safe. It's all about messaging, right?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I know privacy issues, especially for people that have sleeper trucks. I mean, I know that's a topic that's often brought up, but I do think every time I've spoken with fleet people, very similar to your comments, is when it's explained clearly that forget even the terms of your employment. One, it's about your safety and the people around you safety. Two, in many cases, these cameras have been very useful in crashes that have taken place to document that it's not the driver's fault. I've heard a number of stories about how they're having the dash cam to monitor what someone else did when they hit the truck. And of course, we know that lawyers always go after the deep pockets. So fleet companies are always the target of being sued. So if you've got good documentation, that can actually save you from a lot of legal problems. And then finally, if your job is dependent on it, employers can tell you what to do. So I think that all makes sense. And then maybe moving down the continuum, I know our kids don't always listen to us, but parents can also make it the requirement, if you're going to drive a car that they own, that especially for young drivers, that they're abiding by all these things, using these tools, and maybe even using dash cams. So I think that's those are all options that we can be a bit stronger to force people to use the technology.
Absolutely. And I think that takes us, into this legislation. I mean, nobody wants to be forced into doing something. So, organizations out there do it because it's the right thing to do. But, coming down the line, the legislation continues to, evolve. And so I want to talk about this because I was excited to see your post about what's happening in Michigan. But generally on the legislation front, talk about what the foundation's done, where you're going, and how people in the fleet industry can use really If they can't convince their organizations for all the reasons we've already said, talk about legislation and see, if we can help move the needle to push organizations to install technology and implement policy that would require people to just drive in the cab.
Yeah, it was really a year or two into our activities here with the foundation, and we quickly realized that making people aware and talking about technology just wasn't enough. Until and as you said, unfortunately, sometimes we need laws until it becomes illegal to have a certain behavior. Many times people won't change. I mean, if you didn't have speeding laws, speeding would probably be worse. It's still a problem. We often use these hands-free laws, which are very simply defined as laws that make it illegal to hold a mobile device while you're driving an automobile. We see them as a bit analogous to the stiff drunk driving laws of the 80s and 90s. And for your listeners that are that grew up in that era like I did, it was only when the drunk driving laws became very stiff, and then there were people in the courtroom every day making sure that these laws were applied, and we always wondered, what is with these crazy women in the courtroom, and we found out that these were Mothers Against Drunk Drivers who weren't crazy at all. They had a child that was killed, and just like me, they were on a crusade to try to change behavior. So, through those stiff laws, obviously we have not eliminated drunk driving, but the definitely young people and most people wouldn't think of getting in a car after drinking now. So that behavior has changed, partially because people knew that it could hurt them and people around them. But I think even more so because they knew financially they would be hit with a very stiff penalty and lose their license. So we think that the distracted driving is analogous to drunk driving in that sense. That if we can have legislation, stiff laws, and good enforcement, we can change behavior. And by the way, if you look at the statistics, most of the statistics would say that you're much more likely to cause a crash as a distracted driver than even a drunk driver, believe it or not. So yet people don't think twice about picking the phone up and looking at the phone. These are the same people that wouldn't think about driving a car when drinking or impaired. So we got on this crusade with legislation. We call it Hands-Free USA, and again, hands-free is defined as making it illegal to hold a phone or any mobile device while you're driving an automobile. And it's so important because people often ask me, why can't I do this? Why can't I hold the phone to my ear? I'm not looking at it. It's just talking on it. And the real point is that our law enforcement professionals, they need something that is easy to identify, much like they can look in the car and see if you're wearing a seatbelt or not. If they see someone holding a phone in any way, then it's very clear. It's a primary offense. They can be pulled over and given a citation. So we've been active at this, and we were pleased to finally get Michigan done. So as of now, we've got 29 states that have these laws in place. We've been involved for the last 5 years, and we've gotten, I would say, about 15 or 16 of them done together with an organization called StopDistractions.org and a number of other organizations and victims' families around the country. As your listeners probably know, traffic laws are state laws, so you really need to do this state by state by state. It's extremely painful. It's extremely slow and bureaucratic, and every state has different processes. But we were really excited to finally get Michigan done. It went into effect. The law went into effect. Hands-Free Michigan went into effect on June 30th of this year, making it the 20th state. And since then, we've already gotten Alabama and Missouri done as well. And we're hoping to get Pennsylvania done here by the end of the year. So by the end of the year, we expect to have 30 states that will be hands-free. And, we're hoping at some point there's a tipping point where the other 20 states will start saying, okay, let's get on board and get it done.
What's the hesitation? Why wouldn't a state do this? It's so hard for me to wrap my head around. Like, why isn't this easy? With all the statistics.
I could tell you stories in every state, but it's in many cases I would refer to it as just often disgusting politics. The primary argument starts with civil liberties, personal freedom. Don't tell me what I can do in my car. which obviously is a silly argument, because we tell people all kinds of things. You can't drive in your car drunk, you can't drive in your car flashing a gun. But
Yeah.
it's one thing to have civil liberties that only impact you, but when your civil liberties are going to impact others on the road and kill our children, that's a very different story. So, but that's usually the argument. It usually comes from people that kind of hide behind small government, less legislation, big brothers watching. We don't need all of this. So, unfortunately, I think the reality is, much again like drunk driving, if we didn't have these stiff laws, we would have more people driving intoxicated. So we think that argument is a bit flawed. The other thing I would say is, believe it or not, and I'll just tell you, in Michigan, it became a partisan issue. We had a couple of really bad politicians who honestly didn't want our governor to have a win of a piece of legislation, which, by the way, we knew 85% of the people in the state wanted this legislation. And that's consistent across the country. When you explain to people in every state that you're trying to put a law in place that will make roads safer and make your children safer and make all of us safer, 85% of the people generally support it. Yet we get politicians that line up on one side, and this happened to be a leader in the Senate in Michigan who just didn't want our Democratic governor to have a win before the election. So that, to me, is just, that behavior basically cost people lives, last year in Michigan, and it's just really disgusting. It's because most people would agree. This is not a partisan issue. The bills that we passed in Michigan and in every state are always sponsored by Republicans and Democrats. Bipartisan bills always, and it's only one of a few bad politicians play politics that it gets in the way. So those are some of the arguments. I would also mention there's an argument that I think we have to be sensitive to, which is around racial profiling. Many people in some of these states will argue that when we introduce new legislation that allows police officers to pull drivers over, it gets disproportionately applied to people of color or low-income people. It's important that we're sensitive to that. But the reality is, if you drive in a car, put the phone down, and you won't have an issue, and that's really what we've been pushing. Just real quickly, I would say that when you look at the stats in every state where these laws have been put in place, it's usually about a 10 to 20% reduction in crashes and fatalities, and it actually helps bring insurance rates down. So the data is really good out there, and the only thing that we really have to emphasize when we get these laws passed is there's sort of two determinants of success. One is there has to be a very massive campaign so everyone knows that it's illegal, and we've been in the process of that here in Michigan recently to make sure everyone knows about the law. And then the second is enforcement. We've got to make sure we've got our police officers have to be given the resources to be able to enforce the laws. And if those two things happen, behavior changes, and it definitely has an impact and saves lives.
Yeah, well, I'm just, first off, thank you to the foundation for all the amazing work that you're doing. I was so excited to see Michigan finally pass. I caught that on your story on LinkedIn, so I was so happy to see that. And I think this idea of, forcing the issue is critical. And I understand all the nuances, but to say that politics has gotten in the way of safety is just, it's sad, really. And it's kind of like, who are we as a nation that we would put politics before the safety of our roadways and our families? It's hard to understand, but the work that you guys are doing is making an impact, obviously. And I can't wait to, continue to help spread the word.
Hey, I gotta give you and your state a little credit. I believe you're talking to us from Ohio, and there's occasionally a little bit of a rivalry between Michigan and Ohio. So Ohio passed the hands-free law in January of this year. I met with Governor DeWine a year ago in Naples, and he's been great Republican governor who has always been supportive. And he signed that into law in January. It went into effect in April, and I got to say that was part of our push in Michigan was, come on, how can we let Ohio beat Michigan again here? So it did, believe it or not, some of the politicians were really upset about that more than anything else. They were like, come on, we got to get this. So
That
we're going to
does not
continue the
surprise
competition.
me.
Because, joking aside, though, it went into effect in April in Ohio. And again, this company that I've been working with, Cambridge Mobile Telematics, has a lot of data that they use from people that have that use this app. And the data showed that when the law went into effect, before even one ticket was written, there was already an 8% reduction in distractions just by creating the awareness campaign and letting people know that the law was coming. So we're watching this telematics data really closely because that's another side benefit of people signing up for this and getting the insurance benefits. These companies are also doing amazing analytical work to really show us, which times of day, which areas, which demographics are most vulnerable and most critical as we address some of these issues. So a lot of good ties to the technology that comes out of the legislation. And again, we'll continue to use some competition here to hopefully show data that has Ohio and Michigan competing to be safer drivers.
Yeah, I love that. I grew up here in Ohio, so the rivalry is alive and well, and I probably always will be. I do love that we did beat Michigan on this. That's great. So go Bucks.
Hey, but I gave a shout out for to your governor because I met him and he was so supportive, and he was also frustrated with some politics in the Senate in Ohio, and I got to say the same for our governor in Michigan, a Democratic governor, but so all politics aside, she has been committed to this with us even when she was a candidate, back in her first term, and in many cases she was pushing for it, but she didn't want to push too hard because the harder she pushed, the more the Republicans pushed against her for political reasons. And it was just really a sad state of affairs. But she stuck with us, and I was so pleased she signed these bills into law at an ice rink in Plymouth, Michigan, that's dedicated to Mitchell. So the backdrop was Mitchel Kiefer Memorial Ice Rink, and we have amazing pictures of the governor signing these bills into law in front of Mitchell's memorial locker at his memorial ice rink, and it was just a great moving event. And now we're on the crusade to get the awareness and the enforcement moving, so that this summer will be safer than last summer. And maybe just on that topic, I think your listeners probably all know this as well, but we refer to these days of summer as the 100 deadliest days of summer. And this is the period between Memorial Day and Labor Day where traffic crashes and fatalities are up about 15%. So our real goal here is very tangible, is we want this year to be safer than last year in Ohio and Michigan and all the other states that have adopted these laws recently. And I'm convinced that will be effective. So we'll never know. It's hard to count things that don't happen, but there will be lives and there will be families that that aren't going through this year that otherwise would have gone through it if we didn't get this work done.
Yeah, it's so critical. And, data is really important. As fleet leaders, we rely on data for everything we do, to keep our vehicles on the road, to reduce fuel costs, to reduce idling, to help the environment. But when it comes to safety, data is literally our best friend. And fleets out there that have not implemented something are just completely behind the eight ball, head in the sand, and not taking advantage of technology that not only saves organizations so much money and reduces accidents, but can, if you're worried about your image as an organization, the worst thing that can happen is you can hurt someone, right? And so it's just this idea of, why not put something in place now and avoid that and ensure that you can avoid it, all the while saving money. And this idea of, the legislation piece, I think there are a lot of fleet managers out there that just aren't aware, of what's happening. To hear that 30 states are on board and more are coming. I think that at this point, any fleet that's not considering telematics at a minimum and isn't looking at cameras is missing the boat, because this data doesn't lie. And the fact that we have more current and actionable data from people, consumers signing up for this app. And we're seeing these dramatic drops in states that have implemented these laws. I mean, this is a no-brainer for fleets listening out there. And as I share out clips from this episode, I'm going to cite these statistics, and that's real data that fleets can count on and go to their senior leadership with and say, look, if this is happening for, the general public who is signing up for this app and making this a competitive environment, that's what we've been trying to do for years. Gamify it inside your organizations. Do what you have to do, but at the end of the day, there's no excuse for accidents related to distraction in fleets. We have the right and the opportunity to almost eliminate that and get on this sort of what we like to say is this mission to zero accidents. And so it's doable. But congratulations on the progress made.
Hey, I'm glad you brought up the issue of dash cams as well, because one of the arguments that we hear in some states is, and again, I think it's politicians that have a bias towards doing nothing because there's some really bad behavior. But one of the arguments was, my district in the state is very low income, and we can't afford all that technology that you talk about. We can't afford phone mounts even. So I personally offered to buy anyone a phone mount that can't afford one in the state of Michigan, and I've been inundated with requests now for these simple phone mounts so people can mount their phone. But more importantly, the partner we work with on there is a company that came up with an app. The company's called Driver. It's a driver app, and this app will actually turn your phone into a dash cam. So it's not the level of complexity and content that maybe the fleet users would use, but for your teenage drivers to be able to have the phone mounted safely, be able to use it as a GPS, but also have it function as a dash cam with just a very simple app. And then the other thing it does is it ties up the phone so it can't be used for anything else. It really is another way to sort of inexpensively give everyone a dash cam. And again, I know children sometimes don't listen to us, but if you make it a requirement for driving the car that you're loaning them, I think it's another way to create some safe driving technology for the automobile.
Yeah, we talk about organizations not really wanting to toe the line on this when we have the right, and we should. Us as parents too, I would encourage parents out there. I mean, I know this is bold statement, but if you're trying to be friends with your littles, that might not be the best approach, right? We're the example. We have to show them. We have such a short time with them before they're out in the world. And so, I think we should be focusing less on making sure they're, eternally happy, and more about teaching them how to be safe and responsible and accountable for their actions. And again, the most dangerous tool we'll ever give a fleet driver or our children is a vehicle. So it's our responsibility as leaders, as organizational leaders, as fleet and safety leaders, as parents to do the right thing. So to me, again, no brainer.
Yep, and what better way to show your friendship and your love than keeping someone alive? So even though it might seem a little harsh, it's you're obviously doing it for the right reason. So
yeah, exactly. Well, Steve, it's been such an awesome pleasure talking to you. I'm excited to watch and see the progress that continues to be made on the legislation front, getting past all the political BS and really getting down to keeping people alive and keeping people safe. I appreciate you sharing your story and all your knowledge and insights. And I also just greatly look forward to getting this content out to organizations and to fleet and safety leaders out there. We just have so much reach, and we have so many drivers and vehicles out on those roadways. I mean, tell me a time that you've driven down the street and not seen some sort of logoed vehicle. And that's us, that's fleet. And so I'm just hoping that, through sharing this content, we can change hearts and minds and have organizations really make a decision. It's a choice to implement tools, technology, and policy that hold every driver that they put on the road accountable for their own safety and the safety of those around them. So I appreciate your time this morning. It was great talking to you. Good luck with all of your upcoming travels. Safe travels to you. And I hope your family stays safe and enjoys the rest of the summer.
Thanks so much, Erin. It's been my pleasure to talk to you and all of your listeners. And I really appreciate your passion and your help in spreading this message. So as we always say, just drive.
Just drive. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks, Erin.